Good morning guys, and welcome to my unboxing and review of the high-grade Gundam Base Limited Gundam FSD with prototype long-range beam rifle. This is a 2024 Gundam Base exclusive that I got on P-Bandai for $31, which is a bit expensive for a high-grade, but it's only $4 more than the standard release, the high-grade Gundam FSD, which I think came out in 2018 or so. I'll throw up a correction on screen if I'm wrong. But that is essentially the Gundam the Origin version of the Heavy Gundam, which appeared in MSD, Crew Cruise Doan's Island, MSD being the Gundam the Origin version of MSV. So these are designs that exist in universe but weren't shown in the show. So this kit is essentially identical to the standard release Gundam FSD, but it includes the titular long-range prototype beam rifle, which is the Gundam the Origin take on a weapon that we've seen a few times in other kits. It is the weapon of the high-grade Gym Sniper. It is the weapon of the Master Grade Gym Sniper 2 White Dingo team, which I've taken a look at on this channel. You can take a look at that video if you want to see that weapon in Master Grade form. And that, in turn, was the exact same weapon included with the Master Grade Gym Ground type from, I think, like 25 years ago at this point. So yeah, many different versions of that weapon have appeared in Gunpla form. This is the Gundam the Origin version of it. As you can see, it is very detailed, but it looks very rugged. I'm very excited to see how it looks in high-grade form. So, moving on past this, all things considered, fairly basic-looking box art. Moving down to the bottom, we have the full painted build shown off here with in a bunch of different poses, just standing there holding the long-range prototype beam rifle, having it kind of clip onto the ground Gundam style shield, or I guess Gundam local type, because that's the Gundam the Origin version of the Gundam ground type they call it the local type. And showing off here that you can swap out the shoulder equipment for a shoulder cannon if you wish, and then showing off the arsenal here. So in keeping with the past, I guess, month and a half's theme of heavily armed kits, this kit does have quite the arsenal there. It has a wrist-mounted Gatling gun, it has the 100mm machine gun, it has a shoulder-mounted cannon, it has the long-range prototype beam rifle, it has 2 beam sabers and 2 different shields. So yeah, this is a very heavily armed kit that comes with its own veritable arsenal. So, as you can see, not really much to see all across the box here, just showing off the stuff about the Gundam base and talking about MSD. So, getting right into it. So, taking a look at the manual first, this is of course going to come with the standard Gundam FSD manual right here, showing off the mobile suit right there and talking about the specs, talking about the development of it in lore. On the back we have it showing off details with the head and chest, showing a pose here of it like leaping backwards while firing the Gatling gun, showing off some of the weapons, posing with the beam saber, etc. I guess this is show off the Gatling gun as well as the ammo belt going off into the backpack. And then we have a decal guide here with a sticker sheet that came with the Gundam FSD, which is a little rare for a high grade that it comes with its own marking decal sheet. Normally that's reserved for either P-Bandai variants or master grades or real grades. The high grade line usually doesn't have that, so it's pretty nice that it came with that kit. And of course, we have our color guide on the bottom. Getting into the build, and this looks like a pretty typical high-grade build with some parts layering to have color accuracy. So yeah, in general, as is the case with a lot of Gundam the Origin kits, pretty nice build overall. Unfortunately, the standard version of this kit like never gets reprinted. Which is a common problem with the Gundam the Origin kits. A lot of them are not in stock anywhere if you take a look at them. I think the only ones that are regularly in stock are like Char Zaku 2 and the RX-78 2 from the Origin version. But yeah, this is a pretty typical high-grade build overall. And then on the back, you get into mounting the Gatling gun and all the weapons with the shoulder cannon, the 100mm machine gun, or I thought it was the 100mm machine gun because it had the same general silhouette on the box, but this looks a little bit thicker than that. I'll throw up a correction on screen if it's different, but I think this might just be the Gundam the Origin version of the 100mm machine gun from the 1 Year War, like kind of ground suits. And then, of course, you have both different versions of the shield to make, showing off the folding of shield number 1 and the ground deployment mechanism of shield number 2. And then talking about beam sabers and mounting on an action base. And then, of course, we are going to be getting this insert here for the new parts for the prototype long-range beam rifle. So it looks like the brand new parts is going to consist of one rather large runner. And then, of course, you just build the long-range beam rifle. Talk about how to, I guess, deconstruct the long-range beam rifle to use the beam gun inside of it, or to kind of disassemble it and then mount it on the backpack. It's kind of cool that you can show it off in this folded-up travel form here. So I wasn't really expecting it, but it's cool to have. And of course, besides the manual, inside the box we get 5 bags of runners, and inside of those bags we get 14 runners, which is quite a lot for a high grade. It really is trying to earn that more expensive premium price tag. I did mention earlier, but that $27 for the standard Gundam FSD is comparable to more premium recent high grades, like things like the Mighty Strike Freedom or the Immortal Justice. So with the parts count, all the extra plastic you get in the box, that does kind of fall in line with how Bandai tends to price their high grades. So of course, in addition to those runners, we are going to be getting this small sheet of color correcting stickers. This is incredibly small and contains the usual suspects. We will have stickers for the eyes there in black and yellow. We will have head cameras, and then of course we will have this Federation V that presumably goes on the crotch. So all pretty normal stuff. Very nice to see that we need very minimal color correcting stickers in this high grade. I'll check if it's actually like all the color corrections you need to make it color accurate. And then, like you saw on the back of the standard Gundam FSD manual, we are going to be getting this rather large, almost real grade style marking sticker sheet, which is quite nice. A lot of orange stripe details there and a lot of white marking details. Unfortunately, these are sticker style because the Gundam FSD has a rather dark color scheme. Being the Gundam the Origin version of the Heavy Gundam is going to primarily be in dark brown, so the borders of these stickers are going to be pretty apparent, but well, I'll see after the build. So getting into the runners themselves. So starting as usual with the polycaps, because this is a polycap build, being a recent but not super modern high grade. Of course, this will be using polycaps. This is going to be using PC001 for a set of standard 1/144th scale high grade polycaps, so pretty much what you would expect in a slightly older HGUC high grade. So getting into the runners proper, we get two of runner A1 here with a design date of 2016. I'll throw it up on the screen what exactly this is from, but I believe this is going to be from the high grade Gundam local type, the North American front version. So this is going to be a multicolor runner coming in 3 colors. We have a gray here for a number of accent parts, as well as some joint parts for the elbows and shoulders and things like that. We will have orange for a couple of accent parts, I think for chest vents or something like that, in the bottom right there. And then of course we will have the main dark brown armor tone of this kit, comprising of parts for things like the shoulders, legs, and arms. So runner B1, in that same brown tinted, very dark gray, is going to consist of many of our armor parts. You see most of the parts we will need for the head armor, including parts for the head, muzzle, and V-fin. We have a bunch of parts here for the skirts, as well as the main kind of armor part for the ground Gundam style shield. Runner C1 here in a extremely dark gray, almost black color. Going to be a number of armor parts for things like the torso, for the front and back of the torso, I think parts for the backpack, and parts for the feet. Runner C2 in this red tinted orange, going to be only 2 parts, consisting of parts for the head, for I think the chin poking out at the bottom, and the head crest going over the V-fin. Runner D1 in this light gray, going to be a number of auxiliary armor parts and joint parts, as well as our hands here, and the inner frame parts for the ground Gundam style shield, including the kind of kickstand that can flip out and the adapter for mounting it on the arm. Runner D2 consisting of only 1 part in very heavy Gundam style, this single visor piece here in clear red that's going to go over the Gundam's eyes to give it the impression that it's wearing cool guy sunglasses. So, very heavy Gundam. A multicolor runner, runner E here, going to be in 4 different colors. We have light gray up here in the top right for a number of parts for things like the, I think, the drum magazine for the Gatling gun. We have the very dark gray, almost black color here for the folding shield, and more parts for the torso. We have that kind of slightly brown tinted dark gray here for additional parts for the folding shield. And then we have yellow accent parts here. Okay, these are the chest vents, I'm pretty sure. I don't know what those other parts were. And the large Federation cross that goes on the folding shield. I didn't mention it earlier, all those earlier runners were most likely from the Gundam local type. This is specifically for the Gundam FSD with a design date of 2018 instead of 2016. A very tiny runner F here for the ammo belt for the Gatling gun. Runner G2 here, going to be all of the parts for the machine gun here in a kind of primer frame gray. And runner H, going to be a number of parts in a primer frame gray, slightly darker than runner G, for parts for the backpack, for the shoulder mounted cannon, as well as thruster parts there. And then of course we are going to be getting the venerable SB13 for a set of standard 1/144th scale beam saber effect parts in clear pink. And last but not least, the only new runner in the box, runners A1 and A2, not to be confused with the other runner A1. This is going to be everything we need to make the long-range prototype beam rifle. So it looks a little more involved than a typical high-grade weapon because, again, this is supposed to be able to kind of parts form to be either compacted on the back or displayed fully out, and you can disassemble it a bit to reveal an inner beam gun that presumably the FSD Gundam can use in a pinch, as well as just kind of mounting it in the long-range prototype beam rifle. So very cool to see. One thing I'm a little confused about is the box showed that the scope was clearly like a bright green. I didn't see any clear green parts, so I might be missing something. I'll throw it up on screen now if I messed up and I like find the part later, but as you can see there, that scope is in that same kind of, I guess, slightly brown tinted dark gray that the main armor tone is in. So we'll see if I need to paint that in later or something. So with all that out of the way, I will see you after the build. All right, welcome back. Here's the Gundam FSD, snap built, panel lined. Well, what panel lining I could do, because a lot of it isn't going to really show up given how dark the color scheme of this kit is. Decaled up with the included sticker style decals and top coated with Mr. Hobby premium flat top coat. I did that in an effort to attempt to hide the borders on some of those sticker style decals, especially the white text, because, well, given how dark the plastic on this kit is, those borders were really obnoxious prior to top coating. It did work to hide some of them. Like if you, as it spins around, you'll see the larger decals on the shoulders. The borders on them aren't super obnoxious and they're mostly obscured unless you look at it from a specific angle. The smaller ones, however, as you can see on things like the torso, the borders are still very apparent no matter what angle you look at it. So if you get this kit for yourselves, I would recommend only applying the orange stripe decals all across this kit, because they look pretty fine across the board even prior to top coating, as well as the larger marking decals on the shoulders for the EFF and the Unit 1 mark, as well as the large Unit 1 mark on the shield, and the orange stripes here too, of course. So getting right into the build, this is a pretty typical high-grade build, not really that much to comment on. It uses polycaps, but again, it's not really much of an issue because of how simple the armor scheme of this kit is. There isn't much weight to support with these polycaps, so in general, the use of polycaps is okay. It's serviceable. It's not really going to have many balance issues or anything like that. And in general, it's a fairly typical, simple, high-grade build. There are a lot of hollow parts, just a lot of things to have sandwiching together. They did what they could for some part separation to disguise some seam lines as panel lines. As you can see here in the legs, what would normally be two halves sandwiching together and leaving a pretty ugly seam line down the middle of this knee are three parts. You have two halves and then one part for the knee. You have these extra detail lines running down the side that are seam lines, but they're disguised well enough that they look fine and you shouldn't really feel a need to correct them. That goes for a lot of parts across this kit. They did a lot of work to disguise all of these seam lines as detail lines or panel lines, so in general, the build is mostly okay across the board. The only things I would comment on in terms of stability, because in general this kit is fine, are the beam saber holders and the backpack. These beam sabers are very, very loose in here. It's a little bit better after top coating. They're a little bit stiffer. They tend to fall out a little bit less as you're handling the kit, but before top coating, they would fall out constantly. So that's just something to be aware of. Honestly, you should probably just use the beam saber holders either on the side of the kit's left forearm or on the inside of the Ground Gundam style shield there. I wouldn't use the ones in the backpack. They are less interesting than the other options you can mount on the backpack. We'll talk about that in the accessory section, and they're way more stable than the ones on the backpack. The other thing to note are the thrusters in the backpack. You can see there's a lot more of them than you would normally expect on like an RX-78 design. All the three thrusters kind of in the middle of the backpack are all on polycaps, and they are rather loose. So one, they tend to articulate a lot as you're handling the kit, just unintentionally, and they're kind of a thing where you don't really notice them if they're like posed well enough. Like if they're all oriented properly, they're not really something you pay attention to, but if they're askew, they're very noticeable and annoying. So honestly, I probably would have rather them just made these like not articulatable at all, because it's very annoying to have to constantly readjust them. And the other thing is the thrusters are a little bit loose on the polycaps. Again, it was fixed a little bit after top coating, but they do tend to slide off the polycaps pretty often. So it's just something to keep in mind, that especially if you have carpet or something, these small thrusters in the backpack are a bit of a loss risk because they tend to fall off the polycaps very easily. So with all that out of the way, getting to aesthetics then. This is a little weird, because while I do really like the Heavy Gundam, this isn't, I found out later, in between recording the unboxing section and now, that this isn't the Gundam the Origin version of the Heavy Gundam. That's a separate thing. This is the prototype for the Heavy Gundam that was kind of developed as an in-between for the Gundam local type, the Gundam the Origin version of the Ground Gundam, and the Heavy Gundam proper. So this is essentially a slightly modified Ground Gundam, but the Ground Gundam itself doesn't look all that different from a normal RX-78-2. Really, the only differences are the kind of shock bars they include on the tops of the shoulders. You've changes like the lack of the iconic RX-78-2 sub-generators on the skirts, all those yellow boxes across the skirt armor, those are absent, and of course you get the very heavy, the very iconic heavy arms visor that goes over to the two Gundam eyes. I did not mask it off when I top coated because I felt that when it was completely clear, the eyes being fully visible behind them, they looked a little bit askew because of the way the light kind of bent through the visor. Even though I knew that they were on straight, they just looked a little bit off. So I opted to top coat a little bit with matte top coat to kind of obscure the eye, so only the shapes are a little bit visible behind the visor, and I think that's a lot cooler than just having the eyes fully visible through the clear visor. But where this kit really shines aesthetically, which we'll get into more in the accessory section and the posing section, is how this Gundam portrays the ARC 78-2 modified to be a modular weapons platform. Because there's a lot of modularity here, right? There's a ton of optional weapons add-ons you could put on this kit, which is kind of the whole point of the full-scale development Gundam. Like this Gatling gun is optional, although there isn't really a reason to take it off on this kit because there's just a big hole underneath where the Gatling gun mounts and there's nothing to cover it up, so it just looks really bad if you don't have the Gatling gun on. But the two beam saber holders on the backpack can be swapped out for either adapters to hold shields, the prototype long-range beam rifle, or an optional shoulder-mounted cannon, or I guess backpack-mounted cannon. This forearm adapter here you can either use to hold beam sabers, or you can mount like shield, or you can mount the shield on it, or whatever. So this Gundam is very modular, and that really is where this kit shines in the terms of the options that you can portray this kit as, and it gives it a lot of kind of aesthetic variety. If you get this kit, there's a lot of different ways you can choose to portray it, and you almost want to get more than one so you can kind of show it off with all the different equipment options, but I wasn't really expecting that when I got this kit, so I only have the one. Anyway, getting into where I used the color correcting stickers, and I used all of the stickers here on this rather small sheet. Of course, sticker 1 is going to be the yellow Federation V here on the crotch. This isn't the greatest. It always looks a little bit off no matter how well you put it on. Because it's a raised geometric detail, this never really kind of fits onto it properly. It doesn't look that great. So honestly, if you can, just paint it over with yellow paint. It's pretty simple. Sticker 2 is going to be the Gundam eye stickers that go behind the red visor here. So this is something I'm a little conflicted with because I'm not really the biggest fan of the eyes being visible through the clear visor, like I was rambling about earlier. But these are fine. Again, these are to be expected to be in a high grade to have color correcting stickers. Stickers 3 and 4 are of course going to be the head camera stickers there. They're very tiny on this kit for red metallic head cameras for the front and the back. Now there are a couple of color inaccuracies, but they're very minor for the most part. On the suit itself, the only one I noticed were on the legs here, underneath the knees. These like were kind of ridged parts here, this very small trapezoid, is supposed to be inner frame detail poking through the front of the leg armor, so it's supposed to be in the light gray that the suit's frame is supposed to be in, instead of the very dark color it's molded in. And on the long-range beam rifle itself, unfortunately, I pointed out in the unboxing I was confused by the lack of green clear parts for it. That's because it's not color accurate. On this scope, the front and the back are not color separated. They're just in the same kind of very dark gray brown tint they're in the same very dark gray with brown tint that the main armor tone of this kit is in, so you will need to paint that in yourself with green metallic paint or something. The manual recommends doing silver paint and then clear green on top. I just did green metallic and I think it looks fine. So it's just something to keep in mind if you decide to get this specific version with the prototype long-range beam rifle. And for a quick size comparison, here's the high-grade Gundam FSD next to a standard size high-grade, being the high-grade Blue Destiny Unit 1. As you can see, being a standard ARC 78 unit, this is going to be pretty much exactly average height for a high-grade. So yeah, just keep in mind that for vertical space, you're not going to be needing that much extra compared to a normal high-grade, with the only caveat being, especially if you're posing it using the prototype long-range beam rifle, it's going to take up a lot more depth-wise space, and if you're getting this version of the kit, you're probably going to pose it using that rifle. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. So in terms of accessories, here's the high-grade Gundam FSD with a prototype long-range beam rifle with everything it comes with. As you can see, this is quite an accessory spread. The Gundam FSD really does come with a lot and is really living up to its, I guess, purpose in universe as a modular weapons system. So starting as usual with the hand options, you are of course going to get two standard high-grade holding hands that I have on the kit right now, as well as a single trigger finger hand only for the right side. Now, of course, the main, I guess, thing that differentiates this from a normal Gundam that you just have mounted on the kit at all times is this Gatling gun that sticks to the arm right here. It does add a little bit of extra bulk to the right arm and does look pretty nice. Now there are two options for magazines to use with this Gatling gun. You have the small magazine that I have clipped onto it right now, and you have this very large magazine that mounts on the back skirt. This kind of arm right here goes where this, I'm not sure if this is where like the extra magazines for the 100mm machine gun are on the standard Gundam ground type. I'm not exactly sure what these are here, if these are extra magazines or are just like extra armor plates. Just let me know in the comments if you know what it is, because I don't. But yeah, this will just pop off. This will take its place, just mounted on the side. Or yeah, so it will just clip onto the side like so. The stripe decal's coming up a little bit, which is the only really annoying thing about them, is if you have these kind of like wraparound stripe details, they do tend to come up pretty easily. So yeah, this magazine will just clip onto the side there and kind of look like it's mounted on the back skirt. And then on the actual Gatling gun, this small drum magazine will pop out, and this belt's supposed to kind of like wrap around, come around here, and then feed into the side. So yeah, it's a little annoying to initially get in there, and it is going to want to kind of push the arm up, so you have to kind of manipulate and fold the belt so that it doesn't really interfere with the arm. But once you get it in, it does look pretty good with this like large belt-fed Gatling gun on the arm here. It is just a little awkward to get the belt looking kind of natural. So then this might be something I have to fiddle with off camera to look a little better than this, because while it probably looks fine, like when it's actually firing the gun, when it's just in the neutral standing pose, this is pretty awkward because of how the belt keeps wanting to force the arm up. And if you want it to not do that, you have to kink the belt pretty badly to get it to stop tugging on the arm. So yeah, for the main handheld weapon that this kit comes with as a standard release, we have this machine gun. Now in the Gundam the Origin universe, I think this is supposed to be the predecessor or the prototype for the 100mm machine gun we all know and love from the 8th MS team that the EFF used with a lot of their ground forces during the 1-year war. So very similar to that. Oh, one other bit of color correction that I forgot to mention earlier. The scope on the front here is just in the same kind of primer frame gray that the entire gun is molded in, so you will have to paint that in green. That was just something I forgot to mention earlier. But of course, in 100mm machine gun fashion, this wire stock will flip back if you want to use it like that, and it does have a secondary handle to use for more stable firing. Not really much to say besides that. Of course, the magazine is not removable. This is just a pretty solid, chunkier version of the 100mm machine gun we all know and love. Now, for another part that makes this kind of heavy Gundam-like, we have the shoulder, or the backpack-mounted cannon here, which takes the place of one of the beam saber holders on the backpack. Now, I'm not exactly sure if this is supposed to be a small camera detail, but it's very small and very recessed, so it wasn't something I was easily able to kind of get into and paint. But yeah, apart from that, there's not really much to say. This is a fairly simple accessory. To mount it on the Gundam FSD itself, you will just take out one of these beam saber holders, and then the cannon will just slot in where that holder used to go. Now for the beam saber that was on there, the forearm rack here has 2 tabs, so you can put both beam sabers on the forearm if you want, which looks fine. It's a little goofy, but it looks okay, but I think you're going to be taking these off anyway to use the large shield if you're going to use that, which we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, this cannon just kind of sits on the shoulder. It can rotate down when you want to pose the Gundam FSD firing it. Not really much to say. It's just a shoulder cannon that looks pretty all right. One thing I forgot to mention is that you can mount the machine gun on the backpack as well if you're not going to use it. You get this adapter here that will just clip onto this part of the machine gun, and then you can just slot this on the back in lieu of one of the beam saber holders. So if I take this one off, then you can have this pretty loaded up Gundam FSD with the Gatling gun with the big drum on the back, the shoulder cannon, and the machine gun here mounted on the backpack. So again, very modular. If you want your Gundam FSD to kind of be going all out in terms of offense, you can just mount a lot of the weapons on the backpack. Of course, you have too many weapons to be able to mount all of them, but yeah, here it is with most of the weapons mounted. Now, in terms of your defensive options, starting with this ground Gundam style shield. This is going to be the same shield that the Gundam local type gets, I believe. This is pretty much the same shield as the Gundam ground type in the main Gundam timeline. Of course, it has the same deployment gimmick where the adapter can flip up, the kickstand flips down, and then you can just have the shield standing on its own with the Gundam like kneeling behind it to use it as cover or something. To mount it on the arm then, you can see that there's 2 little slots here for tabs to go into. So you will take the beam sabers off of the beam saber rack on the forearm, and then this will just clip onto it, all nice and simple. So yeah, here is the Gundam FSD loaded up with a bunch of weapons with the ground Gundam style shield just clipped onto the arm. This isn't all that interesting. I wouldn't really want to use the Gundam FSD with this normally. Of course, it does have a gimmick with the prototype long-range beam rifle, which we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, here's the Gundam FSD with the ground Gundam style shield. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, these beam sabers can just clip onto the tabs on the inside of the shield. So yeah, if you really wanted to, you could stick some beam effects in the beam sabers like this and pose the ground Gundam having like a poor man's beam tonfa. I don't think it's supposed to be able to use the beam sabers like this in universe, but it's something you can do if you want. That's this kit's biggest strength, all of the options it gives you. The other thing to note is you also get this adapter here for if you want to mount the ground Gundam style shield mounted on the backpack. So it will just clip on like so. And if we want to take, say, this 100mm machine, or if you want to take this machine gun off the back, then this will just clip on like so, and then you will just have the shield on the back here. You do have to have the shield upside down if you have the large drum on the back, because otherwise this will collide with the belt. It is a little annoying, but you can get it to go the right way, but it's tilted a little far back and it does feel a little bit on the verge of popping off like this. So it's just something to keep in mind, that it's a little awkward if you want to pose it like that. Now, the main new defensive armament you get with the Gundam FSD is going to be this large shield, which if you need to, it can collapse like so to have it just kind of not really deployed, so you can have the Gundam FSD like a little more mobile looking. So it will just clip onto the beam saber rack, same as the other shield. Yeah, this is just how it looks when it's not in use, like so. If you want to deploy it, then this will just flip out like so, and you have this pretty nice looking deployed shield. This is definitely the defensive armament I would use with the Gundam FSD normally instead of the ground Gundam style shield. I think this looks pretty great, especially once you have these orange stripe decals and the big Unit 1 marking there. It looks pretty good. And of course, the main star of the show, the reason why you would get this specific version of the kit, the prototype long-range beam rifle, which has plenty of articulation. You have a secondary handle down here, which can articulate. The main handle for it can flip out and clip onto the back here for easier gripping by the Gundam FSD if you want to use it kind of crouching behind the shield. This other secondary handle that the Gundam FSD that uses to hold onto to stabilize it can of course rotate like so. And then you have this arm down here, which is supposed to clip onto the ground Gundam style shield. So you can pose the Gundam FSD crouching behind the shield, firing it with this clipped onto the shield for extra stability, which is pretty cool. And probably the way most people are going to pose this kit, including myself. You'll see that in the posing section in a moment. Of course, this also has a couple extra gimmicks. There's a beam gun concealed inside of the prototype long-range beam rifle. So if you just remove the barrel here, take off this scope, you have a beam gun. I don't know why you would use it like this, but you can if you want. It really doesn't look all that great. The other gimmick is, of course, if you want to store this on the backpack, because like almost all of the other options on this kit, you can store it on the backpack. So to do that, you simply separate these two sections of the barrel here. This arm will kind of flip out and forward. Be careful not to pop the C-clip off of the kind of peg it's rotating about. Flip that forward. This secondary handle will pop off the top. And then once everything's separated, you have to reassemble it. Once you've reassembled it like so, you can, of course, just mount it onto the back. You will have to, if you want to mount it on the right side, you just have it like so, and it will clip on. If you want to mount it on the Gundam's left side, you will, of course, just kind of slot the secondary handle in. If you want to mount it on the right side, you are going to have to flip this adapter around. So if you flip the adapter around like this, then you can just kind of clip this collapsed version of the rifle onto the back. So this is if you want to use the beam gun separately from this. If you don't want to do that, I think you can just clip it in like this, and you can have the fully collapsed beam rifle on the backpack, although it does look a little ridiculous, and I don't think I would pose my Gundam FSD doing that. So that's the accessories spread of this kit done. It was a lot, I know. Finally moving on to articulation, starting as usual with the head. A lot of this is going to be pretty typical polycap articulation. So if you built a high grade that's very polycap reliant, you'll pretty much know exactly what to expect. So in terms of an upward look, the high-grade Gundam FSD can look up quite far. For a downward look, it can look down basically into its own chest. The neck is going to be on a hinge, which will do hinge things. You get some pretty decent side-to-side tilt, and of course, the head can 360 about the ball joint. In terms of the shoulder then, you will get a bit of a shoulder swing, although it's nothing too impressive. It will, of course, be able to 360. as you would expect. The shoulder can move a bit independently of the arm, although it is prone to popping out a little bit if you do so, just be careful. So in terms of an upward raise, nearly last shooting level, which is quite impressive. You will of course get rotation in the upper bicep as you would expect. A double joint in the elbow will give almost a 180-degree bend. The wrist is going to be on a ball joint, which will do ball joint things. And of course, this shield, as you saw earlier, can collapse and rotate and all that. We went over all of the accessory articulation in one section prior. For the torso then, for forward ab crunch, you're not going to get a lot, as you would expect with a lot of ARC 78-2 designs. This runs into the same problem, where the very thick cockpit hatch will run into the rather thick crotch armor that this has. So yeah, your torso options are going to be very limited in terms of forward ab crunch. Backwards ab crunch is a little bit better, but still not great. You will get some very minor side to side, but nothing too impressive. And of course, this can 360 about the peg, but with stuff mounted on the backpack, of course, you will have a lot of collision issues, and especially with this belt running along into the Gatling gun, that will also give a bunch of issues. In terms of the waist then, there is a hip swing mechanism. So, of course, if you want, both legs can just pivot forward like so. I don't know how well you could see that, but there is a bit of a rail on the inside of the hip there. So yeah, the legs can go forward, can swing forward and backwards. The front skirts come together on the runner. I clipped them apart, so they are on separate ball joints, which will give over a 90-degree bend. Yeah, as you can see, this Federation V does tend to slide around a lot, this sticker, so just be careful when you're handling the kit. Side skirts are going to tilt up a little bit, but nothing too spectacular. The back skirt is, of course, going to be fixed in place. For kicks then, for forward kicks, if you swing the legs forward, you will get just under 90 degrees forwards, just under 90 degrees to the side, and just about 45 degrees backwards, which extends to almost 90 degrees if you swing the legs forward. So overall, okay kick articulation, but nothing too spectacular. Of course, you will get full rotation in the upper thigh. Just be careful you don't pop it off the peg. Full double bend in the knee will give not quite 180 degrees, but fairly close to it. The ankle armor is going to be fused to the leg armor here, so there's no articulation for that. And in the feet then, we'll just take this leg off so it's easier to show. In the feet then, there is no toe separation, of course, but the entire foot will swing forward quite far, downward not very far. You will get some side to side, and of course you can rotate the foot about 45 degrees in either direction. So overall, articulation is okay. There are some parts like the arms which are pretty impressive. The legs are okay, the torso is a little disappointing, but overall, that articulation should be more than enough for what you would want to have this kit doing. Speaking of which, let's get the Gundam FSD in some poses. So getting the high-grade Gundam FSD into a spin here, starting with the usual running and gunning pose. As expected, between the rather large surface area of the feet and the lightness of the armor and parts in general, this kit is able to pull off a one-legged running and gunning pose perfectly. Like, it can bounce on one foot with no issue. Honestly, I was really surprised at how this was able to just kind of fit into place in terms of posing and finding the balance. Now, I have it firing off to the side here with the wrist-mounted Gatling gun and the large shield folded up on the arm to make the Gundam FSD look a little more agile, a little more quick, and I think this kit looks fantastic on the ground, especially mobile, because it being based on the Gundam local type, which is the Gundam the Origin version of the Gundam ground type, this is of course a design that's going to look really good when it's on the ground, but it also looks really great moving on the ground, just because of it kind of maintaining the general RX-78 proportions without really bulking it up too much. It still has the very kind of athletic style legs with the organic curves and the general somewhat thinness of it compared to a lot of other ground type or more rugged designs. So this looks really great on the ground, it looks really great in motion, and the wrist-mounted Gatling gun looks fantastic as a weapon, especially with that ammo belt kind of wrapping around the arm. It just makes this display look way more dynamic, and it gives it a lot of energy that a lot of other kits can't really match in their grounded poses. So this is definitely something I would consider posing this kit doing if I got the standard FSD, not the long-range prototype beam rifle version, which we'll talk about in a moment. But before we talk about the long-range prototype beam rifle, here's the Gundam FSD in the air on an Action Base 4, firing the machine gun. I think this is just supposed to be the prototype for the 100mm machine gun, with the large shield unfolded in this kind of Seed-esque, very exaggerated pose firing off to the side. And while I like the machine gun, I like how bulky it is, it really doesn't look great in this one-handed pose with the stock folded up. Part of the appeal of the 100mm machine gun that we all know and love from the main UC timeline is very small and lightweight, and it looks great in kind of nimble, quick firing poses because of its smallness. It's very kind of, I guess, almost machine pistol sized in terms of the proportions of it. This is much larger and more rugged, which means it'll look a lot better with the stock unfolded in a two-handed pose. But in a one-handed pose like this, that typically the 100mm machine gun would excel in, this looks really awkward with how kind of unbalanced and unwieldy it looks with all that weight out past the hand. It just looks really chunky and unwieldy, so it's a little awkward looking. If you're going to pose it with this machine gun, I would recommend you pose it with the stock unfolded in a two-handed pose. It just looks a lot better than this. And the Gundam FSD does look nice in the air. You'll see a pose later where it's kind of like descending from a leap, firing the shoulder-mounted cannon down. I think that's a much better aerial pose than this. While this does work, it's not really something I would recommend posing, especially with that machine gun in a one-handed pose like this. But now getting to the main star of the show, here's the Gundam FSD crouching here, firing the prototype long-range beam rifle with it clipped onto the ground Gundam style shield like it is shown on the box art and the promo art. This is a pose that they kind of advertised very heavily as something you would want to pose this kit doing, and I'll admit it does look pretty good in this pose, or at least it would if I could get the long-range prototype beam rifle posed correctly. We'll talk about that in a moment. But in general, the long-range prototype beam rifle looks fantastic. It has an extremely unique look compared to the long-range beam rifle that we know from the main UC timeline. This looks very unfinished with the way that there are all these kind of gaps in the side of the gun where you can see the barrel like going all the way through, which is really cool. The scope, after you paint it with metallic green, looks fantastic, and the way it kind of clips onto the shield for extra stability is a bit unique, and is something that I really like that this weapon can do. Unfortunately, actually getting the Gundam FSD to hold onto this weapon was a complete nightmare. Unlike something like the machine gun that has a tab that kind of slots into the hand to hold it still, this does not have that, and the handle is just thin enough that it can slip and rotate a little bit in the hand, but not small enough that it can rotate all the way. So what ends up happening is, as you're trying to pose this, because it's very kind of unwieldy to get into two hands, the gun will rotate a tiny bit, the handle will slip a bit, get caught on the back of the hand, and wedge the back of the hand off. The weak point in this kit aren't the wrists, it's the backs of the hands, and they keep popping off, and that means you need to take off the hand and kind of re-clip the handle back on and then put the hand back in. Honestly, I kind of wish the wrists were the weak point, because then it would just be very simple to just pop the wrist back in. Instead, you have to disassemble and reassemble the hand over and over and over again. And what certainly didn't help was that the back of the hand would keep flipping onto the floor, and it just so happens to be the exact same color as my carpet. So it was impossible to find the backs of the hands every time it would flip down into the ground. It would take me way too long to do. And honestly, it's a little more trouble than it's worth. While I really do like the look of the prototype long-range beam rifle, I don't like it enough for all the effort that this took me. And honestly, it's very awkward to even get it into a natural-looking pose. Like, you see it here flying in the air, shooting it downwards. This is the most natural pose I could get out of it. A neutral standing pose with the Gundam FSD just holding the prototype long-range beam rifle was a giant pain. The crouching pose was also really bad because it was a little bit unbalanced. So while the crouching pose you saw earlier and this kind of pose is super cool that the Gundam FSD can pull off, and it looks really great with this long-range prototype beam rifle, honestly, it isn't worth the trouble, and all the other options you get with this kit, I think, are more than worth it if you get the standard version of this kit. So in conclusion, the high-grade Gundam FSD with prototype long-range beam rifle is, for the most part, a fantastic kit. The build is pretty typical for a high-grade build. It's fairly simple, but everything kind of works the way you would expect it to. The color separation is near perfect. All of the surface detail is really nice. The way the parts are separated to kind of obscure what would normally be seam lines as panel lines and detail lines elsewhere is really cool, and it gives it almost real grade level of surface detail with all the panel lining and stuff. I think that was a common through line with the Gundam the Origin kits. The surface detail on them is really impressive overall and is almost real grade like in styling, and it looks fantastic. This kit is remarkably stable despite using polycaps. It has no trouble doing a running and gunning pose, and the general lightness of this kit overall means that it doesn't really have that much of a problem pulling off any poses you would want it to. The only thing I found that might be a little bit of an issue is the is the shoulder. If you have the large shield on, you want to extend it out all the way, might droop a little bit, but in general, I don't know why you would want to do that kind of pose, and the kinds of poses you would want to do with the shield can be pulled off pretty easily. In terms of aesthetics then, this is a Heavy Gundam-like color scheme, but doesn't quite have the Heavy Gundam armor, this being an in-between of the Gundam local type and the Heavy Gundam, which is pretty unique. Besides the Heavy Gundam, you don't really see brown all that often in kits, besides something like the Lefrith Thorn, which that's its own can of worms that I don't really want to talk about right now in terms of aesthetics. But aesthetically, this kit really kind of looks the part as a development unit for a modular weapon system, with all the different options you could put on this kit for mounting weapons onto the backpack, the shield options, the options for the Gatling gun. This kit does not leave you starved for choice at all. This kit has so many different posing options, and all of it is really helped by the decals that you get with this kit, which is a little unusual for a high grade. All of the orange stripes really help break up the color scheme of this kit, look fantastic. These smaller white decals don't look all that great, but the larger ones are okay. If you get this kit and you don't want to get the water slides, I would really recommend just applying the orange stripe decals and the larger marking decals. Just ignore the smaller warning ones that look pretty terrible on the darker colors of this kit. In terms of articulation then, this kit is pretty great across the board except for the wrists and hands. Now, this normally would not really be an issue, except that this kit comes with the prototype long-range beam rifle, and then it suddenly becomes a massive issue. Like I mentioned earlier, posing this kit with the prototype long-range beam rifle is a gigantic pain. It's honestly more trouble than it's worth, and for how fantastic the base kit is besides the prototype long-range beam rifle, I really question the value of this kit being priced about 15% more expensive than the standard Gundam FSD for this long-range prototype beam rifle that looks great but is really annoying to work with and isn't even color accurate. You do have to paint in the scope for it to be color accurate. So would I recommend this kit? This specific one, unless the prototype long-range beam rifle that you're looking at right now is your favorite Gundam weapon of all time, absolutely not. I would definitely recommend the base Gundam FSD, though, if you can find it without it being scalped. The Gundam the Origin kits seem to be in a bit of a reprint drought, and apart from the ARC 78-2 from the Gundam the Origin line and Sharzaku 2, all of the kits don't really seem to be being reprinted all that often, which is a bit of a shame because I think this line is really fantastic and is definitely something that would appeal to a lot of people, and I feel like more people should be able to experience it. So I would definitely recommend you get the base Gundam FSD over this one. So that was my review of the high-grade Gundam FSD with prototype long-range beam rifle. What do you think of this kit? I hope I'm not a super outlier in being really negative about the prototype long-range beam rifle. Normally, I'm not this negative about kits, and it feels kind of bad to be this negative about a hobby that I love, but if you like reviews like these, please subscribe to my channel. If you like this video, give it a like, and I'll see you next time in my review of the Master Grade Gundam Heavy Arms Custom EW. I'll see you then.